episode of LSN on more educational content. Today we'll be focusing on World War II. Well, before we go any further, Andrew, what are the factors leading up to, the Second World War? I'm really glad you asked that. That is such a good question, but I think you should answer that. I don't know, that's why I asked you. It wasn't rhetorical.
What started World War II? We must know who led each country. We have Germany's leader in power of the Nazis, Adolf Hitler. Adolf Hitler was an extreme nationalist and extreme racist. The leaders of Italy, we have Benito Mussolini. On the same side as Germany and Italy, we have Japan. Former Prime Minister of Japan, Hideki Tojo. So you might be wondering who went against these Axis powers. They're called the Allied Nations. The Soviet Union was led by Joseph Stalin. United Kingdom, they were led by Winston Churchill, and in France, they were led by Charles de Gaulle. Canada was led by Mackenzie King, and the United States joined and was started with Franklin D. Roosevelt and then ended with Truman. Totalitarians are, in a nutshell, controlling everything, controlling economics, politics, and even means of communication in the country. Newspapers and even radio, especially back then, to distribute propaganda to the people, as well as controlling the military of the country. There are many reasons why America joined World War II. The first reason was the fall of France to Germany. This made Americans nervous. Americans rearmed themselves in earnest. In the UK, Winston Churchill admitted that they were going bankrupt, so the US government helped them by voting and allowing the Lend-Lease Act, which was the first time in Americans' history. And then because of the bombing of Pearl Harbor from Japan and Hawaii, that ignited the declaration of war against Japan, and that also included Italy and Germany.
Well, war's pretty expensive and takes a lot of effort and coordination. A little bit. It's a good thing we have a piece on wartime management coming up. Roll the clip.
The Office of Price Administration was established within the Office of Emergency Management by the Executive Order 8875 on August 28, 1941. During World War II, the Office of Price Administration, also known as OPA, was the government agency that rationed most consumer goods and regulated their prices. OPA was in place for the duration of the war and continued operations until 1947.
So the War Production Board was established to supervise wartime goods and manage them. It was set up by Franklin D. Roosevelt in 1942. The defense plants had enough raw goods to make the materials that we needed to fight in the war.
Hey Brian, this position's kind of uncomfortable. Let's relocate. All right, man. Let's roll a clip on wartime policy.
Let's talk about the pros and cons of the Japanese, Italian, and German Americans in concentration camps during World War II. Starting with the pros of concentration camps, the Americans felt as if they were safer. Since there were over 1 million of the interns being held in concentration camps, they felt that there were no secret obligations being held with the Japanese, so then there would be no secret attacks.
Whoa, Andrew, don't forget the cons of Japanese internment, dude. Japanese were prone to unreasonable searches, and also they were stripped away from their homes and families simply for being Japanese. This is going to create long-term roots of racism and kind of just like xenophobia, as people are just afraid of each other and the white people.
Interns in the concentration camps were identified based on their social rankings, where prisoners with lower statuses would receive more burdening work and were more prone to death. All of them either died due to starvation, burning, gassing, or being shot by Nazis.
I guess this is just rolled into commercial. We gotta get our money. United Nations one? League of Nations one? Do you know the difference between the League of Nations and the United Nations? Well, let's ask a random American citizen. Jimmy, do you know the difference between the League of Nations and the United Nations?
I do not.
Between the United Nations and the League of Nations?
No.
Well, let me tell you the differences. The League of Nations was set up during World War I to help all the countries, so that way they were in a unified group to talk about problems, so that way wars had happened, but ultimately that failed, resulting in the creation of the United Nations, which they ultimately got together to talk about social and economic problems to limit the amount of wars and conflicts everyone had together by setting up a unified bank to make sure everyone was on the same page.
So one really important strategy by the Allies was the D-Day Normandy invasion. Essentially a plot by the Allies in order to stage the largest amphibious assault in naval history on June 6, 1944. Now the purpose of this was to open up a second front in Western Europe, so then that way the Soviet Union would not be stuck fighting the Germans all the way in Russia. This is really essential in order for just surrounding Germany and pushing them back towards the heart of Berlin. Here we can see that this is the largest amphibious assault in history. This would be like the Atlantic Wall, which was the coastal defenses. There were 5 beaches, which would be Utah, Sword, Juneau, Gold, and Omaha. It took a lot of meticulous planning, even an entire operation just to deceive the Germans into thinking they were going to the wrong place, which is essentially where the US Army made an entire fake army just to make them think that they were attacking over there. There's very little resistance along the beach. They were mainly stationed with penal battalions, which is just going to be people from the Soviet Union. However, one beach, Omaha Beach, was stationed by the battle-hardened 352nd Infantry Division, which was a really experienced veteran division from Eastern Europe and was very seasoned and at full strength. Omaha Beach had the highest casualty rate, having nearly double the amount of casualties as all the other beaches.
Brian!
Wait.
Did you hear what happened to the Nazis after the war?
No? What happened?
Good, because we have a consequences advertisement on that now.
In 1945, conducted by the US, French, and the Soviet military tribunal based in Nuremberg, Germany, begins with 24 former Nazi officials who were tried, and when it was all over, 1 year later, half would be sentenced to death by hanging. The trial was because of their actions, because of aggressive war and crime against humanity. Others received life or life sentences in jail.
Seems like everyone nowadays has their own opinion on something.
Gosh, of course.
Yeah. And sometimes, like, you just don't want to hear it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, sometimes you just got to show it. Speaking of which, I think Marcus has some pretty strong opinions on some things like
Marcus
nighttime bombings and atomic bombs. Like, damn.
Was nighttime bombing justified? Of course not. English wasted nearly all of their supplies and resources, and they were not even accurate at night. So what was even the point of doing daylight versus nighttime bombing? It just hurted more civilians in the end. Was the atomic bomb dropping on Hiroshima and Japan even worth it or justified? Well, let me tell you why it was not. Civilians outnumbered troops 6-1, so there's no point in even dropping the bomb on Hiroshima because all it is are civilians. Basically, Japan was already calling it quits anyways. They're already being destroyed. 60 cities have been destroyed, as well as being blockaded by America's Navy, the Soviet Union. There's no point in even dropping the bomb on Hiroshima.
People are getting kind of bored by now. Why don't we roll a commercial? Which one?
Is the G.I. Joe from Toys R Us? Those little toys?
Yeah, the GI Bill of Rights. We can do that one. Are you tired of being poor and neglected? Everyone's treating you like trash? Well,
What is it?
GI Bill of Rights is for men returning home from World War II. The government provides financial aid for those who want an education to attend college. Also, the government provides loans to help you build or buy a house or start a business when you buy houses to make it much more affordable. The government also provides job training and hiring privileges to servicemen as well. 8 million veterans took advantage of the higher education, and as a result, more people were educated, the soldiers were assimilated back into the environment, and suburban neighborhoods boomed.
Thanks.
Join the GI Bill of Rights today.
While all these men were away during war, I wonder what the women were doing without their husbands.
I also have the same question. I wonder what the African Americans did during the war. We have a clip on that, right? Human interest, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, let's roll a clip.
Hello, and I'm Keith Brat. Today I'm going to be talking about women in the workforce in World War II. There's over 350,000 women during World War II. They worked as parachute packers, clerkists, typists, photographers. You know, some could make an argument that they were just as important as men. Speaking of men, there were over 1 million African Americans who fought in World War II. They were an elite group of American fighter pilots who was specifically a segregated group called the Tuskegee Airmen. They had a double V campaign, and their goal was to achieve victory over Hitler's racism and, in turn, racism in the U.S. Well, that's Keith Brat, signing off on Human Interest.
Pew, 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 pew.
Well, you know, Andrew, there's more to war than just, shooting other people.
Really?
Yeah, there's a lot of tactics and strategy that's involved. And definitely maybe planned out.
How about we show that?
Yeah, let's roll a clip on wartime strategies and tactics.
Hey Marcus, I'm standing here outside the French Maginot Line, and this is exactly where Hitler executed his brilliant blitzkrieg strategy against the French. Now, blitzkrieg is essentially just a swift assault on a position using mechanized infantry, tanks, artillery, and close air support together in order to break through the enemy line at a moment's notice. They would then surround the other positions and attack them from the rear. Civilians are really targeted in blitzkrieg because it creates panic and also it disrupts communications in the enemy lines. Sherman's march across Georgia was essentially more peaceful, destroy railroads and burn down crops and homes, but civilians themselves were not targeted. Unlike in Blitzkrieg, they were targets for war and would be attacked.
After all this World War II talk, Brian, go to your corner. For Historian's Corner.
Next topic on the Historian's Corner is going to be about the parallelism between the totalitarian regimes in the 1930s and also the religious fundamental groups in the modern day. The totalitarian regimes, Japan, Italy, and Germany, usually use martial power, which is the military, to seize control of their nation and also just pursue whatever the dictator decides. This can lead to a lot of things, such as it doesn't safeguard democracy for people because they're definitely at threat. Usually they use that to take power and also expand the actual borders of their own nation across other people, which definitely is going to infringe on their democracy and peace as well.
What about ISIS?
Well, religious fundamentalism in the Far East is quite similar. As radical Muslims gain power through force, they silence the opposing ideologies in order to pursue their own. It infringes on democracy and peace for all non-Sunni Islam people.
Why are we doing anything about these terrorist groups?
Like the USA in the 1930s and the 1940s, they largely just maintained their own business in their pursuit of isolationism, and they didn't really get involved with other people's business until it directly infected them. We talk about, yes, the US now is taking the appropriate response, usually using force, because the radical Islam groups are definitely just a threat to democracy and world peace. Protests by US citizens and stiff guerrilla warfare by the insurgents has definitely made it hard for the US to definitely take care of them. Overall, the US is starting to pull troops out of the area and overall decrease its presence in the Middle East.
Alright, now thank you so much for joining us on this special educational video. I'm Brian.
And I'm Andrew.
And I'm Alex Pham.
Oh my gosh! Oh, get over here. And no, you, fam.